The night was still and heavy, the kind of suburban silence where every sound seems louder than it should. My garage door had been left half open because I was working late under the dim light, tuning my 1969 Shelby Mustang GT 500, the car that had been my pride and joy since I rebuilt it with my father before he passed. The smell of oil, gasoline, and memories still hung in the air. That's when I heard a faint gurgle of liquid flowing into a container. At first, I thought it was just an echo of my tools. But when I stepped out with a flashlight, my breath caught in my throat. There she was, HOA Karen herself, crouched beside my Mustang with a red gas can, siphon tubes sticking out of my fuel tank like a snake. Her smug face lit up in the beam like a thief caught under a spotlight. I froze, because in all the wild accusations, fines, and threats she had thrown at me in the past, I never thought she'd stoop to this. Gas theft? From my car? In my own driveway? She jolted upright, spilling some of the gas on her beige sweatpants, and instead of guilt or shame, she snarled at me as if I were the intruder. "What are you doing spying on me?" she shrieked, pointing the nozzle at me like it was a weapon. I couldn't even form words at first. My veins throbbed with disbelief and anger, and my only reply came out as a sharp, "Are you out of your damn mind, Karen? That's my gas, that's my car." But then, like the queen of manipulation she was, Karen did the unthinkable. She dropped the siphon, yanked out her phone, and dialed 911 with trembling dramatics, screaming into the receiver, "Help! My neighbor is attacking me. He's threatening me in the dark. He's trying to steal my gas." My jaw nearly hit the ground. She wasn't just stealing from Mesh, was flipping the entire script, weaponizing law enforcement as her shield. I shouted back, "You're stealing from me. I caught you red-handed." But she kept wailing, clutching her chest as though she was the victim of some horror story. The sirens came faster than I could think. 2 patrol cars screeched up with their lights slicing through the night, neighbors peeking from windows like vultures sensing blood. Officers jumped out, hands on holsters, barking at me to step away from the vehicle. Karen collapsed against the hood of my Mustang like a damsel in distress, crying crocodile tears about how I had lunged at her, how she feared for her life. My fists clenched until my knuckles went white, but I kept my cool. I knew anger would only play into her narrative. Instead, I looked one officer dead in the eye and said, "Check the can. Smell her clothes. Look at the siphon dripping gas. The truth is right there." The lead officer frowned, then sniffed the air and tilted his flashlight. Gasoline shimmered on the concrete. Karen tried to cover the can with her foot, but it sloshed audibly. She stammered, That's my gas. I was saving it for my lawnmower." But the tube hanging from my fuel tank betrayed her. Still, she pressed on, waving her HOA badge like it gave her some kind of legal immunity. "This man has been harassing me for months. He violates HOA rules. He's dangerous. Arrest him." I could feel the crowd thickening now, neighbors lining up in bathrobes, phones recording, whispers spreading. This wasn't just a petty spat anymore. This was theater, and Karen had made herself the star. But I had something she didn't. My Mustang was parked under a security camera I had installed weeks ago after catching her spray painting a "No parking" sign near my yard. Quietly, without fanfare, I pulled out my phone and opened the app. "Officer," I said, calm as ice, "would you like to see what really happened, in full color and audio?" When the footage rolled on the screen, the silence in the crowd was thick enough to slice. There was Karen, waddling into my driveway with the can, fumbling with the siphon, looking around before sticking the tube into my car. Clear as daylight, undeniable, no words could twist it otherwise. The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. Karen's face went pale, then red, then pale again, her act crumbling like wet cardboard. She tried to swipe the phone from my hand, but the officer stepped between us. "Ma'am, you need to calm down," he said firmly, and that was the moment the tide turned. For a brief, almost surreal second, Karen still tried to roar her way through. She screamed about her power in the HOA, how I was a nuisance, how she could get me evicted, fined, erased from the neighborhood. But then the twist hit harder than either of us expected. From the far edge of the crowd, a new voice rang out, a man I barely recognized, standing with arms crossed. It was Paul Henderson, a quiet widower from down the block. He'd always kept to himself, rarely speaking more than a nod. Now his voice carried like thunder. "That's the same woman who siphoned gas from my truck last month." I didn't have proof, but I knew it was her. "Looks like justice finally caught up." The crowd erupted, gasps and murmurs swirling like a storm. Neighbors began chiming in stories of stolen packages, vandalized mailboxes, missing yard tools. One by one, voices stacked against Karen, until the officers themselves had to hold up their hands for order. Suddenly, it wasn't me against her anymore. It was the whole street against the queen of deceit. By then, Karen was shrieking that everyone was conspiring, that this was a witch hunt, that she was the real victim. But her voice cracked, her tears dried into nothing, and her mask slipped entirely. The officers placed her in cuffs not for the gas theft alone, but for filing a false police report, for endangerment, for everything the footage and testimonies revealed. She flailed, spitting words like daggers, but none of them cut anymore. The neighborhood had seen the truth, and no performance could bury it. What followed was even more unexpected. The next morning, the local news van showed up. Someone in the crowd had sent them the footage, and suddenly Karen's downfall wasn't just gossip in our cul-de-sac, it was public, viral, irreversible. Reporters swarmed, microphones flashed, headlines screamed about HOA president arrested after gas theft, false 911 call. And as much as part of me hated seeing my quiet street turned into a media circus, another part of me knew it was necessary. Because people needed to see what abuse of power looks like, how far entitlement can reach, and how quickly it collapses when light shines on it. I stood on my porch that day, Mustang gleaming in the sun, and watched as neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak now walked up with relief, shaking my hand, thanking me for standing firm. Paul Henderson even brought me a cup of coffee, smiling for the first time in years, saying, "Guess it took a thief for us to finally find our voices." And yet, as satisfying as her downfall was, I couldn't shake the heaviness of the lesson. Karen wasn't just one person. She was a symbol of every petty tyrant who thinks rules are weapons and neighbors are pawns. She called the cops on me after stealing from me, tried to get me thrown in jail for her crime, and for a moment she almost succeeded. But lies can't stand forever. Not when truth is patient, and not when a community decides enough is enough. Would you have reacted the same way if you were in my shoes? Do you think Karen got exactly what she deserved? Or was her downfall too light for the harm she caused? Share your thoughts, because stories like this are never just about one street. They're about all of us, and the choices we make when faced with injustice. The longer I stood there watching the patrol cars' flashing lights reflect off my Mustang's chrome, the more surreal it all felt. Karen was still shouting through the open back door of the cruiser, demanding to be released, threatening lawsuits, HOA fines, and something about calling her lawyer cousin. But every time she raised her voice, the officer in the passenger seat calmly closed the door a little tighter, until her ranting was muffled into nothing but vibrations against the glass. I leaned against my porch rail, exhaling for what felt like the first time in hours. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. One of the officers approached me, notebook in hand, and asked if I wanted to press charges. For a moment, the weight of that question settled heavy on my chest. I had all the evidence I needed, footage, testimony, even the gas can smeared with her fingerprints, but I hesitated. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because pressing charges meant stepping into a public fight that could stretch on for months. Then I remembered the way she had weaponized 911 against me, how close I came to being the one in cuffs simply because of her lies. I tightened my jaw and nodded. Yes, press every charge you can. The officer's pen scratched across his pad, and the crowd of neighbors buzzed with approval. Paul clapped me on the shoulder, muttering, "About time." But then, like a slow-burning fire catching dry leaves, more voices joined in. One neighbor stepped forward, an elderly woman named Mrs. Carlson, clutching a worn gardening glove. She said Karen had stolen tools from her shed last spring. Another, A young couple with a stroller confessed Karen had reported them to child services after their baby cried too loudly one night. My stomach turned as the pattern became clear. Karen had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, hiding behind rules, lies, and intimidation. By the next morning, it wasn't just about my stolen gas anymore. A petition was circulating through the neighborhood, demanding her removal from the HOA board. Social media posts spread like wildfire, with clips of the video uploaded by someone in the crowd. Within hours, the story trended locally. HOA president caught stealing gas, calls cops on victim. News vans rolled in again, and I found myself standing awkwardly in my driveway as reporters shoved microphones toward me. I didn't want fame, but I also wasn't going to let Karen's lies dominate the narrative. I spoke clearly, firmly about accountability, about how no matter their title was above the law. Karen, meanwhile, doubled down. Even from holding, she tried calling into the HOA office, instructing her allies to fine me for community disruption. She posted a rambling message online about conspiracies, accusing me of framing her, accusing the police of corruption, accusing the whole neighborhood of turning against her out of jealousy. For a few hours, it almost looked like she might still twist her way out. But then came the twist none of us expected. A man in a suit showed up at my door. He introduced himself as Detective Alvarez from the county's Property Crimes Division. Turns out Karen had already been on their radar for months. They'd linked her to multiple unsolved thefts in nearby subdivisions: gas siphoning, package theft, even breaking into cars. My footage was the missing piece that tied everything together. "You didn't just catch her for yourself," Alvarez told me, his voice carrying the kind of gravitas that makes you listen. "You helped us build a case that could take her down for good." The trial that followed was nothing short of fireworks. Karen strutted into court in a pressed blazer, hair lacquered with enough hairspray to withstand a hurricane, still clinging to her arrogance. She tried every trick, crying fits, blaming neighbors, blaming me, even waving HOA bylaws like they were federal law. But when the footage played on the courtroom screen, the jury's expressions said it all. There was no mistaking what she had done, no mistaking the lies she had piled on top of theft. The prosecutor laid it out with precision. Attempted theft, filing a false police report, harassment, abuse of authority. I sat in the gallery, hands folded tight, listening to every word. At one point, Karen's lawyer tried to spin a tale about me entrapping her, as if leaving my car parked in my own driveway was some kind of setup. The judge raised an eyebrow so high I thought it might float off his forehead. The absurdity only made her case weaker, and by the end, the jury didn't take long to deliver their verdict. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing day was the final act in Karen's downfall. She stood trembling, no longer arrogant but hollow, as the judge read the decision. Probation, restitution to multiple neighbors, mandatory community service, and most importantly, removal from her HOA position effective immediately. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, but I didn't cheer. I simply closed my eyes and let the justice sink in. Yet the story didn't end in the courtroom. Something remarkable happened afterward. Our neighborhood, once fractured by fear of Karen's wrath, began to heal. Barbecues popped up on weekends. Kids played freely in yards without parents worrying about noise complaints. Neighbors waved to one another again. Paul and I even started working on his old Chevy truck together, a little garage project that turned into friendship. The HOA board was restructured, with residents voting for transparency and fairness over tyranny. And as for me, I kept driving my Mustang, every roar of the engine reminding me not of theft or lies, but of resilience. I had stared down someone who tried to flip justice on its head, who tried to make me the villain of her story, and I didn't back down. The security camera footage, the neighbors' voices, the steady hand of law enforcement, it all came together to prove that truth still matters. There's one last image burned into my mind, though. As Karen was escorted from court, head low, wrists cuffed, she looked up and locked eyes with me. For the first time, there was no anger, no bluster, no entitlement, just fear. Fear that her empire of manipulation had crumbled. Fear that she wasn't untouchable anymore. That moment was worth more than any headline. Now I ask you, If you were standing in my shoes that night, watching someone steal from you and then call the police to destroy you, how would you have reacted? Would you have fought back? Or walked away? Was her downfall fitting? Or should it have been harsher? Tell me, because stories like this are mirrors, and what we see in them says a lot about who we are.